This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, welcome to Teachers Talk Radio and tonight's Late Late Show, which will be hosted by me, Emily Edwards. This week we'll be looking at the new problem that's becoming a worrying trend over the past few weeks, which is the social media bashing of school policies.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
I've always considered myself to be a caring head teacher who acts sensitively to support staff mental health. But what I found increasingly difficult was managing the negative impact on staff mental health when resolving issues related to their employment or daily work. Heartfelt Leadership has been developed by Teachwell Toolkit as a handbook to support head teachers to overcome the challenges of school improvement while supporting staff well-being. We know that difficult conversations can quickly turn into conflict if procedures are not fully transparent, understood and followed. Our handbook takes you through step-by-step processes while maintaining mutual respect, avoiding conflict and finding solutions.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
This is Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs. The first story this week is once again Ofsted. Following last week's news that, contrary to advice from the Cross-Party Committee in the House of Commons, the government would persist with single-word assessments of schools. This week, Ofsted Chief Sir Martin Oliver announced that he would like Ofsted inspections to feel more like a peer review. At the Schools and Academies show on the 2nd of May, Sir Martin indicated that Ofsted had embarked on a reform journey, and he further noted that he wanted Ofsted inspections to feel like, in some ways, a peer review system. While Ofsted and Sir Martin have launched the Big Listen consultation, a group of former Ofsted inspectors, academics, experienced teachers and head teachers, led by Professor Colin Richards and Frank Norris MBE, have launched the alternative Big Listen. They've set up their own website and are accepting responses and views from across the education world. The 50% rule in English faith school admissions, introduced in 2010, stipulating that where newly established academies with a religious character are oversubscribed, at least 50% of their places would be open places, i.e. allocated without reference to faith, is to be scrapped in plans announced by the government. The government also plans to allow churches and religious groups to open faith-based schools for children with special educational needs, which campaigners warned could raise ethical issues. Proposals to scrap the 50% cap, which only applies when schools have more applicants than places, are opposed by Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, on the grounds that it would be divisive and likely to penalise disadvantaged children. by denying them access to local schools. While the government believes that faith-based schools give parents greater choice, encourage better behaviour, and also academic outcomes, Andrew Copston, the chief executive of Humanist UK, is quoted as saying, "The proposal to allow 100% religious discrimination in new state faith schools will increase religious and racial segregation." Teaching assistants are again in the news this week. While recent stories of their declining numbers, their stagnating pay, have been regular features of the news, this week a survey reported in Secondary Education News involving 6,000 teaching assistants in England and Wales found that 39% are covering classes for at least 5 hours a week. A further 15% say they are leading full classes for at least 11 hours a week. National guidance states that support staff should not actively teach any classes they cover, but 75% of the teaching assistants said they have ended up teaching rather than supervising. Astria Academy Trust, which controls 26 schools in the Yorkshire and Cambridgeshire area, is seeking to hire a new executive head teacher on a salary between $116,000 and $133,000 a year. These salaries might seem generous in the light that the St Ivo Academy, a secondary school in St Ives and run by the Trust, is making cuts for classroom resources, but it should also be placed in the light that the new executive principal position comes with 3 layers of management above it. Above the new executive principal would be Secondary Regional Director for Cambridgeshire, Jo Mayhill Johnson. Above her, in the Trust's hierarchy, sits Richard Tutt, its Director for Secondary Education, and above him, Rowena Hackwood, Astria's Chief Executive. And the number of Astria's employees paid at least $100,000 a year has increased from 7 to 10 from 2022 to 2023. It is reported that Ofqual have warned that exam results, GCSE and A-level, will be down this year. This will be the result of the return to pre-pandemic conditions, meaning candidates had no prior warning of what might be coming up in the exams, and the lost learning that resulted from the COVID pandemic. In an interview in Education Week, the statistician Dennis Sherwood once again stated his view that A-level and GCSE grades are only reliable to one grade either way. If you wish to listen to interviews with Dennis Sherwood, you can find them in the Teachers Talk Radio back catalogue, or follow many of these news items on the weekly review on Sunday mornings. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs. Thank you for listening.
Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. As I said, my name is Emily Edwards, and for any recurring listeners, welcome back. It's good to chat to you again, and it is a slightly earlier time tonight of 8:30 rather than the normal time of 9 o'clock. So hopefully you've been able to catch me live, and if not, obviously you're always welcome to go check out the show on Teachers Talk Radio's site at a later time. And if this is your first time with me, here's a little bit of background about my role in education so far. So I'm currently teaching secondary history as a full-time classroom teacher. I started my NQT year back when it was called an NQT in 2017, and I have an NPQML as well as experiences in middle leadership, both in temporary positions as a pastoral deputy head of sixth form and a curriculum lead for history, though thankfully not at the same time. I also have experience in teaching Key Stage 3 to 5 for history and Key Stage 5 or A-level politics. So, with the introductions out of the way, it's time to jump into the show itself and what hopefully won't be too controversial of a topic, talking about the recent social media bashing that we've seen become more common online when it comes to school policies, and understanding obviously where that comes from and our understanding of what we can potentially do on our end as educators and within the education sphere to try and limit the negative impact of it. So, social media has undoubtedly revolutionized the way that we communicate and how we engage with information. It has the power to amplify voices, to mobilize communities, and to hold powerful institutions accountable. However, with that great power comes great responsibility, as a famous Spider Man once said. And unfortunately, we've witnessed how the digital sphere can sometimes descend into this breeding ground for negativity and misinformation. So, from clipboards to reading rulers, we've seen all the social media storms that can occur when people react to a school policy or idea that is promoted on social media. In an era where social media platforms serve as virtual town squares, providing forums for discussion and debate on a global scale, schools find themselves navigating the complexities of public scrutiny like never before. From contentious policy decisions to controversial educational initiatives, the digital realm has become a battleground where stakeholders, both inside and outside the educational sphere, voice their opinions with a fervour that would put 17th century witch trials to shame. So, in the context of education, the consequences of social media bashing can be particularly dire. School policies and decisions, often made with the best interests of students in mind, can come under increase and intense scrutiny and criticism, sometimes without full consideration of the complexities and the challenges involved, as we know, within the classroom. So, what's the difference between a reasonable questioning or critique and a manic online bash? And how does this phenomenon impact our schools, our teachers, and ultimately the quality of education that our students receive?
I've always considered myself to be a caring head teacher who acts sensitively to support staff mental health. But what I found increasingly difficult was managing the negative impact on staff mental health when resolving issues related to their employment or daily work. Heartfelt Leadership has been developed by Teachwell Toolkit as a handbook to support head teachers to overcome the challenges of school improvement while supporting staff well-being. We know that difficult conversations can quickly turn into conflict if procedures are not fully transparent, understood and followed. Our handbook takes you through step-by-step processes while maintaining mutual respect, avoiding conflict and finding solutions.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
So let's get to the root of the problem. And in order to better understand what solutions might be best to deal with these new social media backlash tactics against schools, I'm going to address tonight's topic in 3 stages. So the first stage, which we'll get to in a second, is what's the problem? The second step, why is it a significant problem for staff, students, and wider society? And our third section, our final section, will look at what can we do about it. So let's jump into our first question of what's the problem? Why is it an issue for people online, both inside and outside of the classroom, to use social media to critique a school's promoted policy? Well, if I'm being honest, I think the biggest issue for me is that places like X or Facebook don't really allow for nuance or greater context. Schools undoubtedly want to celebrate policies that have worked to bring out the best in their students, but they don't necessarily have the best word limit to express that on these various sites for whatever reason. And non teachers, understandably, may not fully understand the intricacies of educational policies, this research behind them, they may not have seen that, and they may not fully understand the challenges that people face within schools. Obviously, considering our own experiences with schools are often our understanding of it for most people. So, this lack of context does become a problem because it can lead to this uninformed or even just misinformed opinions. And as we know, these ideas and these platforms are notorious for rapidly spreading, especially this idea of spreading misinformation. So, when it comes to discussions about school policies, this can lead to misunderstandings, and the motives behind certain decisions can be twisted or misunderstood. And I think we've seen this happen before repeatedly on places like EduTwitter. For example, among the many comments I saw on the recent reading rulers debate, so I was having a read through some of the comments, I noticed there was this interesting pattern of people mentioning that reading rulers were only being introduced to support SEN or weaker readers. Um, and that led to a lot of people worried that it was stifling students with a higher reading age from properly engaging with texts. Now, personally, I'm of the mindset that supporting SEN students can actually be a great way to support all students. So I know I've got into the practice over the past couple of years of making sure that my instructions for longer tasks are broken down into steps that I go through verbally, but also as well have written on the board and introduce them one at a time as I kind of repeat those instructions. And I've noticed that's not only been helpful for students with ADHD or cognitive development issues, but it's also been helpful for everyone as they don't have to worry about remembering lots of different steps. They know that they can focus on the task bit by bit, knowing they can always go back to the instructions on the board if they need to. And so I think this idea of supporting one group um, having a negative impact on another is completely false. I think supporting one group does not directly lead to the abandonment of another. And I know as teachers, we work incredibly hard to try and keep that balance and ensure that all students are fully supported. But it was one of those comments that I saw being repeated again and again. And that sort of misinformation can be a huge problem for teachers or even for leaders to try and introduce new policies and gain public support. Because without that full understanding of why these policies are being introduced, it can lead to that misinformation and backlash where realistically it might not even have existed if there was a clearer understanding. And the reading ruler story isn't the only reason why social media platforms to school policies, especially those reactions to those policies, worry me. As someone with a really clear sense of my own political standing, I'm aware that individuals will often bring their own beliefs, values, and ideologies into these online discussions. And whilst most adults, like myself, are able to understand both sides of a debate, come to our own conclusions without demonizing the other side, I am aware that social media has, over the years, encouraged this idea of us versus them as a mentality, and that can be outright damaging to a school if they are deemed the them in the debate and are therefore subsequently demonized. So, I think a really good example of this, and many people might already be on my same wavelength here, but if I mention the Michaela School in London, that often provokes a pretty intense response, one way or the other. And I think it's a great example, therefore, of this kind of Marmite debate on social media when it comes to new ideas or different types of schools or policies. Um, and obviously, that can then show how a personal view can really impact how a person discusses a school's policies overall. Now, personally, and I'll be honest here, I don't agree with rolling out the Michaela School way across the country. And there are policies and ideas that I don't personally agree with, and I would openly disagree with if it was brought as a discussion topic for my own school. However, I do understand that Michaela, like with every other school, has a very unique context, and that requires individualized solutions to deal with any issues or concerns that affect that school. And understandably, what has worked in Michaela for many students might not be kind of replicable across the country, but it has worked for many students there. And I think, obviously, looking at results, that is a really great way to see opportunities for students who may not have had those opportunities in a different school context. So, I understand that there are policies, there are ideas that, whilst I personally disagree with on either a political or ideological or just a personal approach and opinion, I know that I'm not going to go on social media and try and dictate that Michaela changes all its policies and that this is harming children or hazardous to children. And I think ultimately that is the starting point for this problem, having that understanding that we can't just go on social media to critique a school's approach if we don't fully understand its context, if we don't fully understand both sides of that debate. But I'm absolutely, at the end of the day, I'm not going to blame a school for using a method that works for them just because it might not work for me, or I've noticed that it doesn't work in my unique context. In the same way that I wouldn't want teachers from Michaela turning around and telling me that the way I teach is terrible, it's harming children, if it's all based on their personal opinion. So there is that give and take and that nuance that we do seem to lose with social media. And this kind of fits in with another problem that social media platforms tend to facilitate the formation of echo chambers, where individuals are just primarily exposed to opinions and information that just reinforce their existing beliefs. And in those environments, people may engage in social media bashing to gain validation and support from like minded individuals without necessarily actually being interested in the topic or actually coming to the debate with a reasoned criticism. And I think, especially with many commentators not having direct experience in education, particularly within the classroom setting, their perspectives can overlook really important factors, or even just have very unintended consequences towards policies that schools are trying to introduce, leading to potentially good ideas not being implemented in schools for fear of that backlash. So, in terms of an example of this that I've seen, I know that some schools have implemented silent corridors, and that is a very controversial topic online. I'm not going to go into the um, depths of it tonight, otherwise, we'd be here all night. But I know that there are two kind of main arguments here, that critics argue that such policies are overly strict and suppress students' ability to socialize or express themselves. And you have the other side arguing that actually silent corridors are promoting well-being, they're preventing um, bullying incidents or physical aggression between students and things like that, like pushing and shoving. And I think ultimately, no matter which side you stand on, if you can't understand where the other side is coming from and you just stick to your echo chamber of people who agree with you, who just provide evidence to support your claim rather than genuinely engaging in a debate and a discussion, then ultimately we are just going to lead to just a very disappointing outcome where people aren't being heard, schools are forced to change policy under pressure, and that could actually have a really negative effect on young people. So, whether you like things like silent corridors or not, I think we have to be open to the idea that if they work for students and staff in that school's context, then coming out of our echo chamber to see that other side of the argument, to see the evidence where it might work in a particular context, is really important for us to help us address this social media bashing and start to actually engage with a proper, reasoned critique to develop, obviously, compromises or solutions, or just generally a lovelier understanding of each other. So, overall, these examples illustrate how social media can be used as a platform for criticizing various teaching policies, and discussions often revolve around issues of autonomy or effectiveness, equity, or student well being, as we've discussed with things like reading rulers or silent corridors. And whilst I'm not saying that only teachers can discuss these issues, I do believe non teachers have valuable insights from either a parental perspective or just from an outside perspective to contribute to these discussions about education. It becomes a problem when people, both within and outside of the classroom, don't approach these conversations with humility, with an openness to understanding, and in essence, just a bare basic level of respect. Engaging in these constructive dialogues and seeking to understand different perspectives can really lead to a much more diverse and productive conversation about school policies and practices. And the problem is, we don't have that at the moment. So, moving then into my second section of why should we care about this? This seems like a very kind of unimportant issue when you talk about education generally, of schools' feelings and social media bashing and trolling and things like that. So, why is this a problem for staff, for students, and for society? Why should we all care about this? So, breaking this kind of into subcategories, I do like my lists and my lists upon lists. as recurring listeners will know. First things first, problems for staff. Coming at this from a personal perspective, and it's the easiest place to start because ultimately, with all this criticism, especially if it's unfounded or if it's just really personal, this will just have a significantly negative impact on staff's morale and on their personalities and well-being generally. No one wants to be told they're doing a bad job, let's be frank. Especially when so many educators like myself join the profession simply because we want to provide young people with the best education that we can. We want to help the next generation know as much as possible about the world around them, about where we come from as both a nation and as just a people, as well as understanding how we fit into the wider world going forward. What mistakes have we made in the past that we can prevent happening again in the future? How can we be better towards each other, not just within our own local communities, our national communities, but also our international communities? And I've noticed in particular that a lot of controversies online, particularly on EduTwitter forums, that issues around things like uniform policies have been particularly brutal towards staff. It's become very personalized very quickly. So, staff being labeled in kind of this more polite phrasing that I've seen, this idea of draconian or heartless, or this idea they actively enjoy humiliating pupils in front of their peers for not having the right school shoes. And I think this issue in particular is a great example to see how personal this can get and the negative impact that this can have on staff. So, unlike some of the other examples I've mentioned, I'm actually a really strong proponent of school uniforms and the enforcement of them. I do believe um, our young people need an excuse to take away some of the pressures of being young, in particular, young girls having pressures to conform to certain expectations for fashion. And that can be class based. So, having expensive designer brands, which obviously poor students can't afford, and working class backgrounds are kind of emphasized and treated as a negative rather than just, a different kind of lifestyle. And I know, especially as I've mentioned for girls, the pressures to dress older or in a certain more provocative way in some cases can lead to girls feeling like their only value is how they're perceived physically, or they start to feel uncomfortable in their own bodies if they don't conform to these expectations. And so ultimately, where I'm coming from is that I personally believe in school uniforms, and I will happily defend that to parents, to students, that they don't need an extra level of pressure as a young person every morning about what outfit they decide to wear. Having the freedom to know, right, I'm wearing this uniform. Yes, it may look a bit terrible depending on the color choices. I know our school has a very distinct uniform, shall we say, which isn't always the most popular, but I know some schools just have more kind of traditional colors or combinations or badges, blazers, things like that. And I love the fact that we can take that pressure off of young people where all they have to worry about is, is your shirt tucked in? Are you wearing a tie? Where's your blazer? So, in terms of obviously uniform, that's on a personal level. But I know that if I put that onto social media, it doesn't matter how much I emphasize that I'm not doing this to humiliate students, and I will put in every measure in place to support students who may not be able to financially afford uniforms or who have issues replacing uniform. Um, I know that if I put this online, that I will hear very critical comments. Um, People may not treat me obviously with that basic level of respect. There might be some real foul language. Um, and obviously, this idea of feeling uncomfortable sharing that view kind of reflects this idea that I would feel terrible, obviously, hearing that I'm, like a heartless cow, or that I'm a terrible person for, degrading students or trying to humiliate students for not having the right uniform, or I enjoy um, punishing students or sanctioning students in any way. And that would really impact me as a professional, thinking that I'm trying to do something that I genuinely believe would help young people and being told I'm a monster for it. And I know that when speaking to other members of staff around my school, that this fear of talking about school policies on social media can really dampen our morale. And that's a core part of our job satisfaction, retention rates, and just generally our overall well-being. Nobody wants to be told um, that we are a problem. Nobody wants to be told you're bad at your job. And when teachers generally feel unsupported or undervalued, that's going to lead to increased stress, to burnout, and researchers say that this is ultimately going to impact the quality of education we can provide to our students, either by not having professionals in the job, people just choosing to leave and pick jobs that are more respected, or they're less at risk of facing intense criticism. And ultimately, I think it's not okay for young people to bully each other over social media. And so, therefore, it shouldn't be okay for adults to do the same. We need to be that better model for our young people. And we need to understand that the issue that needs overcoming is the way we speak to each other, the way we engage with this debate. Yes, you can disagree with me, and I will wholeheartedly listen to that other side of the argument openly and earnestly. But understandably, the problem is that we can't have those conversations because people are worried about that backlash. They're worried about how we are going to be spoken to. Um, and I think, again, this kind of builds into this idea that it disrupts the professional environment, this idea that educators will feel unsafe or hesitant to express their opinions, and that it devalues the teaching profession as a whole. This idea that we can't be trusted to make these policies, we're not trusted to have our young people, their interest in our hearts. And that is something we'll build on a little bit later when we talk about the problem that this creates for society. But the next section, this is slightly smaller, looking at problems for students, which you might think, well, if we're arguing online as adults, why is this going to affect our young people? Why does this affect students? Well, it's a problem for students since they can see these debates online. They are not blind to this. If anything, they're going to be way more plugged in than we ever are and will ever will be, to be fair. And so, if they want to see this confusion, this disrespect towards teachers, and seeing that with certain arguments, they can try and undermine the consistency and fairness of these rules, it's going to detract from their ability to focus on using social media positively. It's going to potentially bring those issues into school if they see their parents leaving really vile messages on school social media sites. So it could be Facebook, could be Twitter or X, it could be really anything at all, or having private kind of WhatsApp groups to bully certain policies and potentially bully those who enforce those policies. Um, that's obviously saying to our young people that it's okay to be verbally aggressive or disrespectful to other adults, to teachers in particular, and head teachers who should have that authority throughout the school. Obviously, they are making those umbrella decisions that impact us all on a bit more of a micro scale when we look at the classrooms or the school environment itself. And if they can't get that respect and that trust from students that we're not implementing these policies to be heartless, but we're implementing them because we think this will help, that's obviously going to make it really difficult for them to focus on the academic side of things, to focus on the positives, on the fact that the school ethos and the school environment is there for them. And that's going to obviously cause students issues within the classroom and also just within the school generally. And also, as well, that erosion of trust and security, the constant dismissal or belittling of authority figures, obviously is going to have a larger impact with young people when it comes to their approach, not just to school, but also adults and authority figures outside of school. This idea that negative portrayals of teachers, of education, of schools in particular, can be quite damaging to students in the long term. They don't have a sense of belonging to a school if they feel like the school is trying to harm them in some way, either real or perceived. And this has been reflected in various research. Murray and Malmgren in 2005 suggested that students who feel a sense of trust and belonging at school are more likely to engage in academic activities, participate in extracurriculars, and achieve positive outcomes academically and socially. So, obviously, when you take that away from students by suggesting that their school is enforcing unfair policies, that they're harming the students' well-being, if they are not to be trusted, then obviously students aren't going to invest in that school experience. They're not going to join up to the extracurricular or speak to their teachers if they think they've got an issue either in school or at home. They're not going to engage with what the school offers in terms of academically for lessons and for support, because they just won't have that trust there to know that we are there to help. And so, finally, then, why is this a problem for society? The big question: why should non teachers care about what they write to schools on social media? Well, fundamentally, it does impact our society, and therefore, by extension, it impacts themselves. For example, polarized debates on social media contribute to this culture of divisiveness and intolerance, where we see individuals becoming less willing to engage in civil discourse, talking about compromises. And those are core democratic values that help us to build a better society, both within obviously different areas of society like education, but also just generally politically. And if we cannot critically evaluate information, if we can't engage in respectful dialogue, and if we can't participate as expected, really, in a decision making process without resorting to bashing or unfair criticism or overly personal criticism, then ultimately, then we are going to undermine the very core of being able to engage in a civil society. And that is a bit extreme, I'm well aware. That might be a bit dramatic. But if we are encouraging, obviously, the next generation to take critical views of information, looking at the source, where does it come from? I know as a historian, I will gladly teach students source analysis and evaluation all day long to try and help them navigate things like fake news, as well as biased political opinions or propaganda, things like that. But this is obviously a huge issue, not just for our next generation, but for our current generation. We've seen that demands from parents and from societies for uh, heavily knowledge rich GCSEs and A levels under the general guise of they need to be harder, they need to be more difficult. We're seeing too many, back in the days, A's and A stars, grades, 7 to 9s now. And what has this led to, really? It's led to content heavy courses, overly complicated question stems, and all of this just hinders a student's ability to develop this love of learning and to really develop the skills that they're going to use both within the classroom, but also outside of the classroom in their futures. And so the pressures that society can put on individual professions or on governments, and that bashing of the profession, that bashing of young people's outcomes, has now had a very real impact on education going forward. And that's all due to public assumptions about teaching and education as a whole, and the fact that it is now publicized and more easily accessible on wider and wider scales. And on that note, when teachers are subjected to relentless criticism and scrutiny on social media, it completely undermines their professional expertise and their autonomy. So I said I'd come back to this when I was talking about the impact this would have on staff. But social media platforms, whilst they can provide this forum for individuals to discuss different ideas and to debate, obviously, different forms of research, supporting or challenging, or how can we adapt this to be effective in my context rather than just trying to copy and paste from a different context. But when you have people who are not knowledgeable on these topics, who don't read the research or are not engaged in listening to different opinions, whether scientific or a bit more anecdotal, it can devalue the knowledge and experience that teachers and professionals are bringing to education. So, social media bashing in particular perpetuates this negative stereotype of the teaching profession, portraying us as either incompetent, those who can't do teach, that horrible, horrible stereotype that I'd be happy to see the back of. Or this idea that we're all kind of secretly mistrustful in disguise, that we're outright cruel, that we're draconian, that we enjoy punishing young people, we're power hungry. Um, and that constantly negative portrayal can really diminish respect for teachers. There's a reason we have a teacher retention crisis. We are overworked. We are, in the grand scheme of things, struggling obviously to get fair pay for the work that we do. And yes, whilst we have lovely holidays, and I will never deny that, um, ultimately that comes at the expense of our wider life outside of work. I know a lot of teachers, if you talk to them, talk about sacrificing evenings, weekends, and this isn't just the normal expected hours given in any profession. This does bleed into a lot of people's time with family, time with friends, time for themselves, and all at the expense of their kind of personal lives. We also see this constant negative bashing of them as people. So all that effort and all that work that gets put in, they are then just facing not only increased pressures within the workplace from their students trying to do the best for them from internally as well, that desire to do the best for our young people, but also as well online being told all that effort is worthless because fundamentally you're not doing this to benefit students, you're doing this for some power trip, or you're doing this to boost your own ego or something like that. And so when teaching is portrayed as this thankless and disrespected profession, talented individuals who may be the best teachers for our next generation of young people, they're going to be less inclined to enter the field, or even those who are already here may choose to leave for a job or a field that is more respected. And so that's going to exacerbate teacher shortages, undermine the quality of education generally, and that is going to be the impact that we will see on our society. The worse education we see for our young people, that is going to carry over generation and generation um, into the future. So overall, social media bashing of the teaching profession contributes to the devaluation of educators' experiences, their expertise, the level of respect that we see outside the classroom for teachers, and undermines efforts to obviously recruit and retain qualified and excellent educators. So, addressing this issue will need us to understand how we can really foster a culture of appreciation, support and respect, obviously for what we do as teachers. And this isn't to say that we need to be, martyred or framed up as these, God's gift to man. I'm not that egotistical, I promise. But it is important that we do have a renewal of that social contract between teachers, parents, and students. This idea that we are all in it together. We want the best outcomes. No teacher wants to see a child fail, fundamentally. And so, if we can return to that core concept and understand that us all as stakeholders are in the same boat and we're all trying to paddle in the same direction, making that journey to that child's goals and achieving the successes that they want to achieve, it makes that so much easier and changes the discourse, both in person but also as well virtually. So, here comes then the big section 3 question as promised. What can we do about this? Is there anything we can do about this? When it comes to social media bashing of schools, we can't just obviously say that this is, a societal problem, call it quits, wash our hands of it, job done. We do need to obviously try and come up with some solutions that you can walk away with. Recurring listeners, you can probably see where I'm going with this. I always love to introduce my opinions of what potentially we could do as some form of solutions, open up the floor, the debate to seeing what everybody else out there thinks, and see if we can collectively come up with a solid list, a great list of solutions to our problems. So, what better way to address these problems than by ticking them off to-do list style? I am a teacher by trade. I do love coming up with ideas to tick jobs off the list. So, first things first, what is a solution that we could come up with to address the problem of a lack of context or a lack of understanding of school policies? Well, schools can address this issue themselves by providing really clear and accessible information about their policies, their initiatives, and even sometimes the challenges. If they say, look, this is an issue that we have been facing, we have spoken to students or we've spoken to parents, and we can see with our own eyes these are the issues with our school. Here's what we are introducing to deal with that, and here is why. Um, Obviously, we have so many more tools at our disposal now to communicate with parents, and we can actually use obviously social media platforms, but we also have direct contact with our direct stakeholders, our local community, newsletters, our own websites, open forums for people to visit and to speak in person rather than via screens. And that can offer insights for parents, for non educators, into the reasoning behind these decisions and understanding the broader context of various educational issues. So it also allows for input and active participation from so many different groups within our school environment. So that can be parents, it could be community members, could be teachers, could be even students. I know I do love a good bit of a student voice survey to get a sense of what students are walking away with in terms of their perceptions, mostly of my subject, but also of my teaching. Not obviously asking for, you know, tear into me, kids. Let's, rip my teaching approach bare, but it is a great way to see what has worked, where obviously students have perceptions of me as a teacher. Where could I improve? There are some ideas obviously going, well, that's a personal choice. If they just like geography more and that's why they've picked it as an option, that's nothing that I need to change. But it is useful to know that there are some times where not everybody will have the same deep love of history that I do, but it allows me to obviously then make my understanding of history and why I enjoy the subject a lot clearer so students can have that information. And that can then obviously be applied to policies generally. Why are we introducing this? Why are we doing learning labs or cold calls or, hands up as an approach? Why are we doing this? So you can understand and you can therefore get on board and join us in making this the best policy for our young people. And I think this is great because it can ensure that this wide range of perspectives are considered, and it can be used generally by the school from a local perspective to shut down kind of outside criticism. This idea of this is what works for our community, this is what our stakeholders have talked to us about, this is their support of our policies. We're not going to listen to random accounts. We're not going to take heart anything that comes from somebody without skin in the game, so to say. And in terms of obviously listening to parents, it doesn't mean that we just, scrap all the educational research, scrap all of our policies, and we just do what the parents want us to do. It does allow for people to just share their concerns in a more respectful manner, and it gives schools the opportunity to preempt certain criticisms or certain concerns by explaining the reasoning behind it and getting potentially some ideas to make those reasonable adjustments. Where is the grey area with these policies? Where can we tweak and improve? I even had a training session, actually, really timely, about some of the behaviour policies that we have. And it was a great session where they had various scenarios. What would you do in this scenario? And from there, we were able to discuss how different people enacted the same behaviour policies. Where obviously there was grey area and the school needed to show more clarity for staff or for students. Also, some elements of tweaking. Okay, you're right, actually. The official policy doesn't fit that scenario very well. That adapted version actually is way more useful, and therefore we're going to tweak the actual official policy to meet those adapted changes. So it is a really powerful tool that we can have to address kind of the more open critique and keep the focus on what matters, what works for our young people, listening to the voices that matter rather than caring about the general debate on social media. So, how do we solve the problem of abuse and or insensitivity online? So, obviously, we can encourage respectful and constructive dialogue on social media platforms by just having a really clear guide, especially for uh, private groups, so like Facebook groups for the school or on the school's website. And you can have moderators in school run online forums to monitor those discussions to ensure things remain civil and productive. But more realistically, I think the better way to do it is to shut off comments for online posts if responses become toxic and or to report abusive messages online. That way, then we can just cut it off at the whole. If you cannot have um, a respectful and appropriate conversation about this that doesn't devolve into personal attacks, then we're just not having that discussion. This is the policy. This is how this works. Please feel free to sort of speak to us politely. But if you can't do that, we're not going to have that debate. And in the same way that many of the businesses will have policies of if we hear verbal abuse towards staff, that is going to come with a sanction. The same thing can be applied in schools as well, especially when it comes to online platforms. And that can be helpful as well with showing students good boundaries and modeling better, healthier discussions, hopefully. How do we solve the problem of people having misinformation or making kind of political or ideological jabs? Well, obviously, we can always foster transparency and accountability in our decision making process. This isn't coming from one person's, they've read a book and now all of a sudden all the policies in the school are changing. We can build that trust within the community that this has been a decision considered by many different people, sharing the rationale behind policies and initiatives and soliciting that feedback can show a commitment to serving the best interests of students and educators, not just kind of running it under the perception of kind of a tyrannical dictator of, one day this policy is going to be in place and the next day it's going to be this policy and we'll never listen to opinions or any critique of this. Addressing that misconception can be really valuable simply by being just more transparent and obviously demonstrating that commitment to openness and being in the best interest for young people. We can also combat misinformation by providing really accurate and up-to-date information through official channels. So if there's a rumor going around about school, punishing girls for the length of their skirts and saying, if it's not ankle length, then they're put in isolation for 10 weeks, that sort of dramatized approach. Having obviously an official channel to correct false or misleading statements before they become embedded within the community can be a great way to obviously prevent a social media storm, and as well making sure that other parents in particular, aren't just taking their advice and understanding of the school through um, random accounts online. They do have an official channel that they can go to if they need to. And then finally, how do we deal with the issue of social media bashing impacting staff morale? Well, we can use every method that we've talked about so far, and we can also prioritize the mental health and well-being, not just of staff, but also of leaders. It's important as well that we want to make sure that those people being kind of the face of those changes aren't then also being the target or the figurehead for that abuse. We don't obviously want head teachers feeling isolated, that they're the ones getting the backing from staff to introduce these policies, and then it feels very much that they are abandoned at the altar of the social media storm and told to, handle it yourself. You get paid the big bucks. You're not the main concern here. Obviously, we want to make sure that everybody in a school is protected from overly negative or unnecessarily critical responses online. And this can come from promoting really positive discourse with staff or on social medias. We do love a good model or what a good one looks like after all. So if we have obviously staff or schools interacting with each other, obviously through official social media accounts, that can obviously promote or boost support for head teachers, feeling like it's not just them throwing up a policy into the ether, the social media ether, I should say, and then facing the backlash by themselves. There's a community. It is safety in numbers, for lack of a better phrase. But also as well, we can provide resources for stress management, positive reinforcement in schools, just checking in on each other, taking care of each other. I know that going around school, it is common, say good morning, how are you doing? We had a great session from a colleague talking about anxiety, talking about depression, talking about the isolation that he had felt in previous schools and also in previous roles. And the fact that this school had been very welcoming and very supportive helped deal with the impact that things he'd seen on social media about him and his role in the school, helping to support that member of staff whilst that was being addressed separately. It really does have the biggest impact. And by taking care of each other, we can really help to improve our collective mental health and also our sense of belonging in the school. We are part of that school too. We deserve to feel confident. We deserve to feel happy. We deserve to feel as if we've all got each other's backs. And that can be a great way to deal with the individual feelings that come with negative social media backlash. So I'll be honest, whilst not all of those problems that I've raised have easy solutions, I mean, how can we change society's attitude to teaching is maybe an idea to explore in another show. It's not really something I can throw out here with an easy solution. But we do have control over certain responses. We do have control over certain situations. Proactive communication, collaboration with our communities, and having this commitment to fostering understanding and empathy in our schools can really help us to navigate the challenges posed by non-teachers' involvement in discussions about education and minimize the negative impacts social media storms can have on a school community. So, with that being said, hopefully I've shared some ideas that you can walk away with. If you do have any ideas, if you do have any questions you want to kind of have us build on outside of the show, please obviously feel free to do so either via social media. Try not to obviously create a social media storm after all this, but also as well through Teachers Talk Radio. Got the hashtag online as well as obviously the website where you can listen to various different perspectives and share your opinions there. As always, thank you so much for everybody tuning in this week to listen to my show tonight and obviously continuing that discussion on Teachers Talk Radio. I really appreciate everybody's engagement, either listening live or commenting on different social media posts, promoting obviously different topics on the show, or by listening later on the Teachers Talk Radio website and or Podbean, your choice. Overall, it's great to discuss these ideas about best practice and about issues that do affect us all, both within and outside of the classroom. So I will see you all in about a fortnight's time for my next show. Do keep an eye out on social media for more details. And in the meantime, take care, and I will see you all next time.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.